Before it became an icon of American firepower, the M16 was a rifle U.S. soldiers learned to fear more than the enemy. In the jungles of Vietnam, where humidity soaked everything and combat offered no second chances, this new wonder weapon jammed, misfired, and failed at the worst possible moments. Young troops wrote home begging for cleaning kits that didn't exist, while others blamed the rifle for the deaths of friends who never got a chance to fire back. So how did a rifle meant to modernize war become the weapon so many troops despised? Before the M16 became the most controversial rifle in American military history, it started as an idea sketched in a small California workshop, a place that looked nothing like the Pentagon. Eugene Stoner, a civilian designer at Armalite, which is a division of Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation of Hollywood, wasn't trying to create a battlefield legend. He was trying to solve a math problem. How do you give a soldier more firepower without giving him more weight to carry? At the same time, the U.S. Army was stuck with the M14, a wooden, full-power battle rifle that kicked hard, overheated fast, and weighed nearly as much as the soldier carrying it. Infantry in Vietnam was already complaining that it felt like fighting a jungle war with a Korean War weapon. Procurement teams knew they needed something lighter, faster, and easier to mass produce. That's where Stoner's AR-15 entered the conversation. A 5.56mm small caliber bullet, aluminum and fiberglass instead of wood and steel, 20 rounds instead of the M14's 8. The pitch was simple: a rifle that fired faster, weighed less, and let soldiers carry triple the ammo. Internally, the Pentagon was divided. Traditionalists didn't trust a plastic-looking rifle. McNamara's systems analysts loved the numbers, and pressure was building. With each passing day, Vietnam was heating up, and commanders wanted a weapon that matched the speed and chaos of jungle combat. Then came the turning point: ARPA's early field tests in Vietnam. U.S. advisors reported that the rifle was astonishingly accurate, easy to control, and devastating at close range. Those field reports, combined with Colt's aggressive lobbying, created the momentum Washington needed. By 1964, the decision was set. The rifle would be adopted as the M16, and hence the U.S. Air Force became the first ever military branch to adopt the AR-15 under a different name. It happened fast, too fast. And buried under the excitement was a quiet gamble. America had chosen speed over durability, and the soldiers would pay the price. For a rifle that was supposed to represent the future of American firepower, the M16 stumbled into Vietnam like an overconfident newcomer who hadn't read the fine print. On paper, it promised everything a soldier could want: lighter weight, higher ammunition capacity, lower recoil, and a round that boasted impressive wound ballistics. In practice, the rifle exposed cracks that quickly snowballed into life-or-death failures on the battlefield. The most notorious flaw was its recurring failure to extract spent cartridges. Troops would fire, the casing would stick inside the chamber, and the rifle would choke at the worst possible moment. This wasn't a rare mistake either. It was widespread enough that soldiers wrote letters home, begging for help, and entire platoons were caught defenseless in firefights. Many deaths in Vietnam were directly blamed on this single mechanical failure. What caused such a catastrophic issue? Ironically, it wasn't the design itself, at least not entirely. The original M16 prototype used a cleaner-burning stick powder optimized for its gas system. But once mass production began, the U.S. military switched to a cheaper ball powder without adjusting the rifle's internals. This powder burned dirtier and spiked chamber pressures, creating fouling that the designers had never prepared the weapon to handle. Essentially, the Army rewired the rifle's temperament without telling it. Then came another oversight: no chrome-lined barrels or chambers in the earliest M16. At a time when American troops were fighting in humid, filthy, monsoon-drenched jungles, this was a recipe for rust and corrosion. A chrome lining would have added durability, eased extraction, and reduced fouling buildup, which are all basic features that countless other rifles already use. The US military simply skipped it. And if that wasn't enough, there's the infamous myth that tanked morale even further: the claim that the M16 was self-cleaning. Commanders spread this belief, the Army printed it in pamphlets, and soldiers were deployed without proper cleaning kits. Imagine handing someone a Ferrari, telling them it washes itself, and then sending them into a desert sandstorm. That is essentially what happened. As fouling from the ball powder built up and the unlined steel reacted to the jungle environment, troops couldn't clean their rifles even if they wanted to. Many resorted to improvised tools, ripped patches, and desperate attempts to unjam barrels mid-firefight. The design also had structural defects that added to the problems. The M16's direct impingement gas system vented hot, dirty gas straight into the action, a feature that worked only when paired with the correct powder and consistent maintenance. With the wrong powder and no cleaning kits, the system was doomed from the start. Carbon built up rapidly, locking bolt carriers in place and turning routine missions into mechanical battles of their own. Even magazines became part of the problem. Early aluminum mags bent easily, lost spring tension, or failed to feed rounds reliably. A rifle can be flawless mechanically, but a bad magazine turns it into dead weight. All of these failures shared one root cause. The M16 wasn't just handed to troops, it was rushed to them. There was not enough user testing, feedback was ignored, and early complaints were brushed off as soldier error. Meanwhile, the AK-47, the M16's biggest rival, built a reputation for being the exact opposite: ugly, heavy, but brutally reliable, no matter the mud, sand, or climate. To its credit, later variants like the M16A1 solved most of these problems. Chrome lining, proper powder, cleaning kits, and improved training finally allowed the rifle to perform as originally intended. But the damage to its reputation had already been done. For thousands of soldiers, the M16 wasn't the sleek, black rifle of the future. It was the weapon that had failed them when they needed it most. When Marine Private Jim Magera landed in Pubai in late 1967, he was young, wired with adrenaline, and armed with the belief that the United States and its weapons were unbeatable. Before he even had time to breathe in the humid Vietnamese air, a supply sergeant shoved a set of gear into his arms: boots, helmet, flak jacket, and a sleek black rifle that looked nothing like the heavy wood and steel weapons used by generations before him. The M16A1. The miracle rifle, the brass called it. Light, fast, deadly, or at least that's what Magera was told. For a new Marine headed straight into combat, that marketing line did its job. Magera admitted he felt almost invincible holding it. It gave the kind of confidence a young man clings to before he sees the real war up close. But Vietnam had a way of breaking illusions fast. At the Rock Pile, a rugged firebase overlooking the DMZ, Magera's introduction to the M16 was immediate. No speeches, no detailed training, just a makeshift firing range and a destroyed Jeep serving as his target. On his first trigger pull, the rifle cracked sharply, that signature recoil absorbed by the spring in the stock. However, his second pull? Nothing. He squeezed again. Still nothing. He yanked the charging handle, ejected the spent casing, loaded a fresh round, and the rifle refused to fire. This wasn't a jam in the middle of a firefight. This was literally the first time he ever used the weapon. And it failed. For Magera, that failure was more than technical. It was psychological. How do you trust a weapon that betrays you before you've even met the enemy? That fear followed him into every mission, every ambush, every night, patrol through wet elephant grass. He carried the M16 into firefights anyway, because he had no choice. But he fought with the constant dread that it might seize up at the exact moment his life depended on it. Countless soldiers shared the same worry. Their letters home, now archived, are filled with stories of M16 locking, jamming, failing to cycle, or refusing to fire altogether. And unlike Magera, many didn't make it back. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of American troops died in firefights while desperately trying to clear stuck casings or slam their malfunctioning rifles back into operation. The weapon meant to modernize U.S. infantry instead introduced doubt, hesitation, and panic into moments where even a second of uncertainty could be fatal. The Army tried to counter the criticism with training pamphlets and posters, even commissioning comic legend Will Eisner to draw cheerful maintenance guides in PS, the Preventive Maintenance Monthly. But no cartoon, no matter how clever, could erase the memory of watching a friend fall because his rifle failed. For soldiers like Magera, the M16 wasn't the sleek black rifle of future propaganda. It was the weapon that forced them to confront a terrifying truth. After being dragged through the mud, literally and figuratively, the M16's reputation began to turn the moment its makers admitted what went wrong. The solution came in a suite of hard-won fixes that transformed the flawed rifle into a far more reliable tool in combat and gave birth to the M16A1. By 1967, Army engineers and combat advisors had finally acknowledged the core problems that were crippling the M16 in Vietnam. One of the biggest breakthroughs was chrome plating the chamber and later the bore. Early M16s lacked this protection, and in humidity-drenched jungles, the steel chambers pitted and corroded, making spent casings stick fast, the famous failure to extract. Chrome not only made the metal harder and slicker, but it also dramatically cut down those dangerous jams. A second major fix was re-engineering the rifle's cycling system. The Army introduced a heavier buffer, which slowed the bolt's rate of travel and reduced a harmful bounce effect that had been causing parts to misalign or fail. This change came after reports of excessively high cyclic rates, caused in part by the switch to a new propellant which made the rifle run faster than intended. Another corrective measure was controversial: the forward assist. This little button allows a soldier to manually push the bolt fully into battery if it doesn't lock on its own. While some engineers, like Eugene Stoner, argued it was a quick band-aid, many frontline units welcomed the reassurance, especially when fighting in messy, dirty environments. But hardware changes weren't enough on their own. The Army also overhauled maintenance training. Troops began to receive real cleaning kits, lubricants, and instructional materials, replacing the earlier self-cleaning rifle myth. In fact, a famous comic book-style manual was published to teach proper care in a way that was accessible and clear under the stress of war. Finally, some ammunition tuning was done. The M16A1 began to run more reliably with the actual ball powder being used, and the improved design tolerated the fouling better than the original. The result of all this work was the M16A1, formally standardized in 1967. Compared to the nightmare early years, the upgraded rifle proved much more dependable. Field reports and technical reviews both showed a strong drop in malfunction rates. Though it never erased the scars of its flawed debut, the M16A1 earned renewed confidence, and in many units, it became the weapon soldiers could finally count on. Even after the fixes, the M16A1 never fully shook its reputation with soldiers. It had earned their distrust. Yet over time, it became reliable enough to survive the war. If you want to see more of such stories from the battlefield, subscribe, because the best stories are yet to come.